This story is titled, My Girlfriend Cheated on Me for a Year, so when I found out I got revenge by sleeping with her sister and mother, now she's going crazy. Hey Reddit, my name is Marcus and I'm 29 years old. This is the story of how discovering my fiancé's affair 3 weeks before our wedding completely destroyed my life, and then rebuilt it into something infinitely better. Victoria and I had been together for 6 years when everything fell apart. She's 27, and we met at a friend's house party right after college graduation. From the outside, we looked like the perfect couple. Everyone in our social circle thought we were relationship goals, the couple that actually had their shit together while everyone else was still figuring out their lives. I work as a network security specialist at a mid-sized tech company. It's nothing fancy or glamorous, but it pays well and leaves me with decent money left over after expenses. Victoria works in public relations for a big retail chain, and she's always been ambitious about climbing the corporate ladder. Together, we'd been diligently saving for our future. We had managed to put away about $38,000 specifically earmarked for our wedding and honeymoon, money that represented years of careful budgeting and sacrifices. Last year, I proposed to her at her favorite Italian restaurant. I'd spent $2,800 on the engagement ring, following that old rule about spending 2 months' salary. Victoria said yes, and we immediately threw ourselves into wedding planning with the enthusiasm of two people who genuinely believed they'd found their person. We were supposed to get married in just 5 weeks from when this all started. By the time everything imploded, we'd already locked in most of our vendors. The venue deposit alone was $19,000, completely non-refundable. We'd put down $3,500 for our photographer and another $3,200 on catering deposits. Every detail was planned, every check was written, and I was absolutely pumped to finally start our lives together as husband and wife. Looking back, my excitement feels almost naive now. My background isn't anything particularly special or dramatic. When I was 11 years old, my parents died in a car accident that completely upended my childhood. My Aunt Helen stepped up and raised me alongside my 2 cousins in a small house in the suburbs outside Miami. It wasn't easy for any of us, but she made sure I stayed focused on school and building a stable future. I worked my ass off academically and managed to earn a partial scholarship to our state university. That's actually where I met Victoria during my sophomore year through mutual friends at a campus party. I've never been the most outgoing guy in any room, but I've always maintained a solid group of close friends, mainly people from my gaming group and colleagues from work. I've always been what you'd call the reliable type, the guy people call when they need help moving furniture or need a designated driver for the night. It's the kind of boring, stable life my aunt always hoped I'd build for myself after all the early trauma I'd experienced. Victoria came from a completely different world than I did. While my family struggled financially after my parents' death, she grew up with money. Not crazy rich, but definitely comfortable. Her father, Robert, is a successful dentist, and her mother, Linda, works as an elementary school principal. She has 2 siblings, an older brother, Daniel, who's made it big in the finance world, and a younger sister, Sophie, who's currently working on her graduate degree. In college, Victoria was everything I wasn't. The pretty popular girl who seemed to effortlessly command attention wherever she went. She was vivacious and ambitious, always finding herself at the center of any social gathering. For some reason that I still didn't fully understand even after 6 years together, she noticed me despite being completely out of my league. Everyone said it, including me, if I'm being completely honest with myself. She had this magnetic personality that drew people to her, and I felt incredibly lucky that someone like her had chosen to be with someone like me. At least, that's what I believed back then. 3 weeks ago, my entire world came crashing down in the most unexpected way. Victoria was at her final dress fitting with her mother and sister, one of those important pre-wedding appointments that I wasn't invited to. I was at home using her iPad to check some fantasy basketball stats when a WhatsApp notification popped up from her boss, Blake. Blake is a 38-year-old millionaire who runs their department, and the message that appeared on the screen made my heart literally stop beating for a moment. Still thinking about last night, the message read, "Your mouth is fucking magical." I know I shouldn't have done what I did next. I know that snooping through someone's private messages is a violation of trust. But in that moment, with those words burning into my retinas, I couldn't help myself. I opened WhatsApp and started scrolling up through their conversation history, and what I found there made me feel physically sick. There were texts, nude photos, and videos that I can't even bring myself to describe in detail without feeling that same nausea wash over me again. But worse than the explicit content were the detailed plans they'd made for hotel meetups during supposed work conferences that never actually existed. As I kept reading, it became clear that they'd been carrying on this affair for almost 4 months. Even worse, based on references to last summer in Las Vegas and that weekend in Nashville, this wasn't their first time together. They'd been doing this intermittently for at least a year and a half. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the iPad steady as I continued reading. One particular exchange between them seared itself into my brain, and I know I'll never forget it as long as I live. Blake had asked her, "What happens after the wedding? Going to play the good wife?" Victoria's response was like a knife twisting in my chest. "Please, Marcus is so boring in bed. He actually thinks missionary twice a week is spicing things up. I need a real man on the side." Blake then asked, "Won't he suspect anything?" And Victoria's reply destroyed whatever was left of my heart. "Marcus? He's clueless, such a trusting idiot. I could probably fuck someone in our bed and he'd believe me if I said it wasn't what it looked like." I immediately took screenshots of everything I could find, methodically documenting the evidence of their affair. My hands were still trembling as I emailed all the screenshots to myself, making sure I'd have proof of what I'd discovered. Then I carefully put the iPad back exactly where I'd found it, trying to make sure Victoria wouldn't know I'd been through her messages. I spent the next few hours sitting in our apartment in a complete daze, looking around at all the framed photos of us that decorated every surface. 6 years of memories were scattered throughout our home. Vacation pictures from trips to the mountains and beach, holiday photos with both our families, stupid selfies we'd taken at concerts and festivals. Each image felt like it was mocking me now. Had any of it been real? Or was I just a convenient cover story for her all along? The boring but stable guy she could parade around to her parents and friends while having her real fun on the side? When Victoria came home that evening, she was practically glowing with excitement about her dress alterations and how perfect everything was going to look for the wedding. The contrast between her happiness and my devastation was almost surreal. I didn't yell or throw the iPad at her or create a dramatic scene. Instead, I asked her calmly and directly what the fuck was going on with Blake. The look that crossed her face when I said his name wasn't guilt or shame like you might expect. It was pure annoyance. Annoyance at being caught, like I'd inconvenienced her by discovering her secret. Then she hit me with the most unbelievable response I could have imagined. "It's just sex, Marcus. It doesn't mean anything. I wanted to get it out of my system before the wedding. After 6 years with one person, can you really blame me?" I just stared at her, unable to process that she was actually trying to justify this. Was she seriously attempting to make this sound reasonable? "Don't look at me like that," she continued, rolling her eyes like I was being overly dramatic about the whole situation. "It's not like you satisfy me anymore anyway. When was the last time you even tried something new in bed? Blake is just an experience, a phase. Once we're married, it'll be done." I finally found my voice and managed to respond. "You've been fucking your boss behind my back for months, and I'm supposed to be okay with that because it's your what? Your last hurrah before marriage?" She actually laughed at my question and flipped her hair over her shoulder in that dismissive way she did when she thought someone was being ridiculous. "God, it's not like I'm in love with him or something. He's just good at certain things that you're not." Then she looked me up and down with this completely dismissive expression that made me feel about 2 inches tall. "I mean, let's be real, Marcus. You're not exactly the type of guy who turns heads. You should be grateful someone like me even looked your way. Most girls with my options wouldn't have settled for—" She gestured vaguely at all of me, like I was some kind of consolation prize she'd reluctantly accepted out of charity. When I didn't respond immediately, she sighed dramatically, as if my silence was yet another inconvenience she had to deal with. "Look, every bride gets cold feet. Some people go bungee jumping or take a solo trip to Europe. I decided to explore other options. It's completely normal. You're making this way bigger than it needs to be." My buddy Derek, who's 31 years old, has always said Victoria was high maintenance. But this was next-level entitlement. She genuinely didn't see what she'd done as wrong. In her twisted mind, she deserved a final fling before committing to me forever. Like marrying me was some kind of prison sentence. She needed a last taste of freedom before accepting. "If it bothers you that much," she added, tossing her purse carelessly on the counter and checking her reflection in the hallway mirror, "go get yourself some side action too. Consider it my pre-wedding gift to you. Just be discreet about it. Unlike you sneaking through my messages. That's honestly the most unattractive part of all this. You violating my privacy." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She was actually turning this around on me, making me the bad guy for discovering she was cheating. The audacity was breathtaking. "We're done," I said, my voice strangely calm despite the storm of emotions raging inside me. "The wedding's off." That finally got her attention, She whirled around, eyes wide with shock. Don't be ridiculous. We've put down deposits. My parents have already paid for the rehearsal dinner. Everyone's already RSVP'd. The invitations went out months ago. It was telling that her immediate concerns were about the logistics and money, not about the fact that she'd completely betrayed my trust and destroyed our relationship. I'm sure you'll figure it out, I said, grabbing my keys, wallet, and laptop from the counter. You're resourceful that way. She started yelling after me as I headed for the door. Where the hell are you going? We have the cake tasting tomorrow. Marcus, don't you dare walk out that door. Marcus. I didn't answer her desperate calls. I just got in my car and drove straight to Derek's apartment, texting him on the way. Need a place to crash. Victoria's been cheating. Wedding's off. His reply came back within seconds. Doors unlocked, beers in the fridge. I always knew she was a snake. Derek let me crash at his place with no questions asked that first night. His girlfriend Lisa, who's 28 years old, made up the couch for me and gave me the space I needed to process everything. They're true friends. They didn't push for details or try to force me to talk about what had happened. They just let me sit in stunned silence, trying to wrap my head around how my entire future had just imploded in the span of a few hours. The next morning, the texts and calls from Victoria started flooding in. You're being childish. We need to talk about this like adults. You can't just throw away 6 years over one indiscretion. My mother already ordered the flowers, for God's sake. The messages kept coming, each one more desperate and manipulative than the last. I couldn't deal with her attempts to minimize what she'd done, so I blocked her number completely. I went to work in a complete daze and told my boss I needed to take some personal days. Then I headed back to Derek's place and just existed in this strange limbo state. I didn't eat much, barely slept, and spent most of my time staring at the ceiling, wondering how I could have been so completely blind for so long. How many signs had I missed? How many times had she lied directly to my face while I believed every word? After 3 days of ignored calls and blocked numbers, Victoria started getting creative. She began using her friends' phones to contact me, trying different numbers to get through my blocks. Then I received a message from someone I wasn't expecting. Nina, who's 26 years old and has been Victoria's maid of honor and supposed best friend since high school. Can we meet for coffee? It's important, her message read. I figured Victoria had sent her to do damage control, but I was curious about what kind of bullshit story they'd cooked up together. We agreed to meet at this local coffee shop where Nina works part-time, alongside running her graphic design business. I know what happened, she said before I'd even fully sat down at our table. And you should know this isn't the first time. I nearly spilled my coffee all over myself. What? Nina looked uncomfortable but determined to get through whatever she needed to tell me. Victoria's been like this since college. She cheated on her ex-boyfriend before you with multiple guys. She's done this with you before too. She pulled out her phone and showed me text messages that made my stomach drop. There were conversations where Victoria had bragged about hookups with her personal trainer 3 years ago, some guy from her company retreat last year, and now this ongoing thing with Blake. But the worst part wasn't just the cheating. It was the way she talked about me in these messages. Marcus is so fucking clueless. He thinks I'm working late, LOL, one message read. He's too scared to lose me, said another. I could probably have someone right in front of him and he'd apologize to me. Then there was the one that really gutted me. The sad puppy look on his face when I say I'm too tired for sex. If only he knew I was drained from Blake railing me in the supply closet. I felt physically sick reading her words. 6 years. 6 fucking years I'd been completely loyal to this woman, believing we were building something real together. There was even a picture from just 4 weeks after I'd proposed to her. A photo of her making out with some random stranger at a club during one of her girls' nights out. She'd captioned it to Nina. Last-minute applications for the position of husband still being accepted. Why are you showing me this? I asked Nina, my voice barely above a whisper. Aren't you supposed to be her best friend? Nina sighed deeply, pushing her dark hair behind her ears in a nervous gesture I'd seen her do countless times over the years. I used to cover for her cheating because she convinced me it was just harmless fun. But the way she's talking about you now, it's cruel, and I realized I've been enabling something really toxic. You don't deserve this, Marcus. She looked down at her coffee cup, clearly struggling with what she was about to say next. Plus, if I'm being completely honest, she's not the same person I became friends with in high school. The success at work, that fancy apartment, all the designer clothes, it's changed her. She treats people like they're disposable now, even me. What do you mean? I asked. Last month I lost a big client, and I was stressed about making rent. I asked if I could crash on you guys' couch for just 1 week until my next check came in. Victoria told me no because it would bring down the vibe of the apartment to have a struggling artist there. Nina's voice was bitter now. We've been friends for 12 years, and she couldn't help me for 1 week. I shook my head, remembering how I'd wondered why Nina hadn't been around much lately. When I'd asked Victoria about it, she'd simply said Nina was just busy with work, nothing more. There's more, Nina continued, her voice getting quieter. I probably shouldn't tell you this, but she's been using your joint savings account to buy stuff for Blake. Expensive watches, weekend trips. She even paid for a spa day for his wife to get her out of the way so they could use his house once. That revelation hit me like a physical blow. Our wedding fund, the money we'd both been saving for years. I'd been bringing lunches from home, skipping nights out with friends, picking up extra freelance projects for bonus money, all while she was spending our future on her affair partner. I'm really sorry, Marcus, Nina said, and I could see genuine sadness in her eyes. I should have told you sooner. I guess I hoped she would stop before the wedding. That she really did love you underneath it all. Did she ever? I asked, hating how pathetic and broken I sounded. Love me, I mean. Nina looked at me for a long moment before responding. I think she loved the idea of you. Stable, loyal, kind. The guy her parents would approve of. The guy who would never leave her no matter what she did. But the real you, the person you actually are. She shook her head slowly. I don't think Victoria sees anyone clearly beyond how they can be useful to her. Over the next week, something unexpected started happening between Nina and me. We began talking regularly, and it started with her feeding me more information about Victoria's deceptions. She showed me screenshots of Victoria mocking me to their entire friend group, evidence of other affairs I hadn't even known about, and proof that Victoria had been systematically using our wedding fund to buy expensive gifts for Blake. She called your comic book collection embarrassing man-child junk to everyone, Nina revealed during one of our coffee meetups. But she told you to your face that she thought it was cute. Then she showed me another message. She told her gym friends that your dream of opening your own cybersecurity consulting firm someday was adorably delusional, and that she was managing your expectations by telling you to stick with your safe corporate job. Each revelation was like ripping off another band-aid, painful but necessary. The picture that was emerging became clearer with every piece of evidence Nina shared. Victoria had never respected me, and maybe she'd never even liked the real me at all. I'd been nothing more than a carefully managed asset in her life plan. Meanwhile, Victoria was acting like absolutely nothing had happened. She kept texting me about flower arrangements and honeymoon plans from new phone numbers I hadn't blocked yet. When I didn't respond to those messages, she would alternate between playing the victim, I can't believe you're giving me the silent treatment over nothing, and being outright aggressive, you're ruining everything I've planned because you're too insecure to handle reality. Her sister Sophie, who's 24 years old, even called me at one point to say I was being childish and needed to man up because Victoria was stressed about the wedding. Clearly, Victoria had fed her some completely fabricated version of events. When I told Sophie the actual truth about what had happened, there was a long, uncomfortable silence on the other end of the line before she said, "That sounds like something Victoria would say, actually," and hung up. I never heard from her again after that conversation. Derek and his brother Liam, who's 33 years old, decided to take me out one night to try to get my mind off everything that had happened. We ended up at this bar downtown, and I ran into Nina, who was there with some of her friends from art school. We all ended up hanging out together, and for the first time in weeks, I actually found myself laughing and genuinely enjoying myself instead of dwelling on the betrayal. As the night went on, I started noticing things about Nina that I'd never really paid attention to before. The way her eyes crinkled when she laughed genuinely. How she actually asked thoughtful questions about people and remembered the details they shared. The creative passion that lit up her entire face when she talked about her design work. She was wearing this vintage Legend of Zelda t-shirt that I commented on, and she absolutely lit up, launching into this enthusiastic discussion about how Ocarina of Time was her all-time favorite game. We ended up in this incredibly intense conversation about video games, classic RPGs, and game design philosophy that I realized Victoria would have shut down with an annoyed eye roll within 2 minutes. But Nina was just as into it as I was, matching my enthusiasm and adding her own insights about the artistic elements of game design that I'd never considered before. "How did I never know you were such a gamer?" I asked her, genuinely surprised by this side of her personality. Her smile faded slightly and she looked a bit uncomfortable. "Victoria told me you weren't really into games anymore, that you were trying to be more mature since the engagement and had moved on from those kinds of hobbies." Another lie. "Gaming was my primary stress relief. the main thing I did to unwind after long coding sessions at work. It was one of my core interests, and Victoria had been systematically cutting me off from connecting with people who shared those interests with me. The realization hit me that she'd been isolating me in ways I hadn't even recognized. The contrast between Nina and Victoria became starkly apparent that night. Where Victoria dominated every conversation and made everything revolve around her, Nina built people up and made them feel heard. Where Victoria was constantly checking her appearance and taking selfies for social media, Nina was completely present in the moment and focused on the people around her. I'd always seen Nina as just Victoria's friend, but she was actually amazing in her own right. And apparently, I wasn't the only one who was noticing the connection that was developing between us. "Dude," Derek said after Nina left to use the restroom, "she's into you." "What?" "No, we're just commiserating over Victoria's bullshit," I protested. "Uh-huh. And I'm the Queen of England," he replied, taking a sip of his beer. "Look, I'm not saying you should do anything about it right now. That would be a mess given the circumstances. But just notice it, okay? Notice that there are women out there who actually see you for who you are." I brushed off his observation, but I couldn't help feeling something shift in how I perceived Nina. Not as a potential romantic interest. It was way too soon for that, and the situation was far too complicated. But as someone who might actually understand me in a way that Victoria never had, even after 6 years together. Over the next few days, Nina and I started texting constantly. The conversations began with updates about Victoria's latest manipulative attempts, but they quickly expanded to cover everything else in our lives. We talked about music, movies, games, work frustrations, and family stories. She told me about her struggles as a freelance designer and how her parents still pushed her to get a real job despite her obvious talent. I opened up to her about losing my parents at such a young age and how video games had been my primary escape during those dark years with my aunt. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could actually breathe again. Like maybe my entire life wasn't completely over just because my engagement had imploded. Later that week, while I was still staying at Derek's place, I received a particularly nasty text from Victoria that made my blood boil. "Either get your ass home tomorrow, or I'm selling your signed comic collection to pay for the wedding you're jeopardizing with your pathetic sulking." That collection was worth nearly $12,000, but its monetary value wasn't even the most important part. Some of those comics had been passed down from my grandfather, who had raised me after my parents died. He'd taken me to comic conventions when I was a kid, taught me about first editions and the importance of preservation, and made each new acquisition a special memory between us. It was literally the only tangible thing I had left of him, and Victoria knew exactly how much it meant to me. I showed the threatening text to Derek, who immediately said, "Dude, you need to get your valuables out of that apartment ASAP before she does something crazy." Nina offered to help me retrieve my things since Victoria was scheduled for a work dinner that night. Probably another rendezvous with Blake. Nina had been to our apartment enough times over the years that it wouldn't look suspicious to neighbors if anyone saw her there with me. We went to the apartment together, and while I was carefully packing my important documents and comic collection, Nina was looking through Victoria's planner to see if there was anything else I should know about before completely cutting ties with her. "Marcus," Nina called from the bedroom, her voice sounding strange and troubled. "You really need to see this." She was holding Victoria's personal planner, open to a page titled "After Marriage" in Victoria's neat handwriting. What I saw there made my stomach drop through the floor. It was a detailed list that included items like get Marcus to add me to his inheritance from grandparents $165,000, and convince Marcus to let Blake invest our savings. Apparently, Blake had been promising to double Victoria's money through some investment scheme. But it got worse. The list also included phase out Derek and Lisa, with a note labeling them as negative influences. There was accident pregnancy by year 2 and full-time mom by year 3. But the item that hit me like a physical punch to the gut was the last one. Keep side arrangement with Blake. He's promised VP position if things continue. She had literally mapped out her entire plan to use me as a stepping stone while continuing to fuck her boss for career advancement. My future flashed before my eyes. Trapped in a marriage with a woman who saw me as nothing but a meal ticket and sperm donor. Systematically isolated from my real friends, my inheritance squandered on her and her lover. Raising a child that might not even be mine. Something inside me snapped completely. I looked at Nina, who seemed equally horrified by what we'd discovered, and said with cold determination, "She doesn't get to win. Not this time." We spent the next hour gathering more evidence. We took pictures of the planner, found receipts for expensive gifts for Blake hidden in her dresser, and discovered a burner phone with even more explicit messages that made what I'd seen on the iPad look absolutely tame by comparison. Nina made another disturbing discovery when she checked Victoria's laptop. There was a folder labeled Insurance that contained manipulated screenshots of text conversations with me, messages I'd never sent, things I'd never said. She'd been creating fake evidence to make it look like I was abusive or controlling, building a backup plan in case I ever caught her cheating. She was setting the stage to paint herself as the victim if everything fell apart. "She's been gaslighting you for years," Nina said quietly, staring at the laptop screen in disbelief. "Making you think you're the problem when it's been her all along." That night, after securing all my valuables at Derek's place, Nina and I sat up talking for hours. Everything came pouring out. The betrayal, the manipulation, the years of systematic lies that had shaped my entire reality. I admitted to Nina how Victoria had slowly made me doubt myself over the years. My worth, my attractiveness, my interests, my career ambitions. She had gradually chipped away at my confidence in every area of my life. I told her how I'd given up hobbies that Victoria deemed immature, how I'd lost touch with friends she considered bad influences, and how I'd changed my appearance and behavior bit by bit, always trying to be good enough for her approval. Every change had been presented as a suggestion for my own improvement, but looking back, I could see the pattern of control and manipulation. Nina shared her own experiences of being under Victoria's influence. She told me how Victoria had subtly controlled their friendship over the years, dictating who Nina could date, undermining her career choices, borrowing money she never repaid, and even taking credit for Nina's design work when talking to potential clients. We'd both been trapped in Victoria's web of manipulation for so long that breaking free felt like finally coming up for air after nearly drowning. I'm not sure who moved first. One minute we were sitting on Derek's balcony talking about everything we'd discovered, and the next minute we were kissing. It wasn't planned, and it wasn't revenge against Victoria either. It was a genuine connection between two people who'd been manipulated and controlled by the same person for years, and were finally seeing clearly for the first time. Afterward, as we lay there together, Nina whispered, "What have we done?" I didn't have a simple answer for her. Part of me felt guilty, though not because of any remaining loyalty to Victoria. That had died the moment I read her messages. But I wondered if this was just a trauma response. Two wounded people clinging to each other in the middle of an emotional storm. But another part of me recognized something real and honest in what had happened between us. Something respectful and genuine that had been missing from my relationship with Victoria for a long time. Maybe forever. "I don't know what this is," I told Nina honestly, "but I know it's not wrong." She nodded against my chest. "But it's complicated. Very, very complicated. We agreed to keep what had happened between us private for now. We needed to figure out the Victoria situation first, then see if there was something real to explore between us once the dust had settled. Of course, the universe had other plans for us. The rehearsal dinner was scheduled at this fancy restaurant that Victoria's parents had paid for, $2,400 for 35 people. I'd barely communicated with Victoria in the 4 weeks since discovering her affair, but I showed up that night with a very specific plan in mind. I'd talked it through with Derek, who thought I was completely insane, and with my Aunt Helen, who surprisingly gave me her full support. "That girl's been playing you for years," Aunt Helen had said when I explained everything to her. "It's time she learned that actions have consequences." Victoria acted like everything was completely normal at the rehearsal dinner. She was playing the excited bride-to-be for both our families, putting on this elaborate performance of happiness and love. Her parents, Robert and Linda, who are both around 57 years old, were hosting the event with obvious pride. My Aunt Helen, who's 55 and raised me after my parents died, was there with my cousins. All our friends were present too, including Derek, Lisa, and yes, Nina. The tension in the room was absolutely unreal. Victoria kept trying to touch me throughout the evening, attempting to act like we were still madly in love and everything was perfect between us. Meanwhile, I maintained a cold, distant demeanor that was becoming increasingly obvious to everyone present. Her mother asked if I was feeling well, clearly picking up on the strange energy. Her father made awkward jokes about last-minute wedding jitters, trying to lighten the mood. During the appetizer course, Victoria clinked her wine glass to get everyone's attention. "We're so happy you're all here to celebrate our special weekend," she announced with a brilliant smile. "Marcus has been a little distant with wedding jitters, but we're more in love than ever, right, honey?" She tried to take my hand across the table in a gesture that was meant to look romantic and reassuring. I pulled my hand back and stood up slowly, my chair scraping against the floor in the suddenly quiet restaurant. "Actually, I have an announcement to make," I said, my voice surprisingly steady despite my racing heart. The wedding is canceled. Victoria has been having an affair with her boss. The room went absolutely dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop. Victoria's face transformed from her fake smile to absolute rage in a matter of seconds. "He's lying!" she shrieked, her voice cracking with panic. "Marcus, what the fuck are you doing?" I pulled out my phone calmly and held it up for everyone to see. "I have screenshots of your conversations with Blake. Would you like me to read them aloud to everyone here, or should I just send them to all the guests so they can read for themselves?" Her father stood up abruptly, his face turning red with a mixture of anger and confusion. "What is the meaning of this, Marcus?" "Robert, I'm sorry you're finding out this way," I said, looking directly at him with genuine regret. "But your daughter has been cheating on me for months, possibly years. She's been using our wedding fund to buy expensive gifts for her boss, who she's been sleeping with to get promotions at work." Victoria immediately switched tactics, and suddenly tears were streaming down her face as she tried to play the victim. "It was one mistake, one moment of weakness. He's blowing this completely out of proportion." That's when Nina stood up from her seat across the room. "It wasn't one mistake, Victoria. It's been at least 4 different men over the past 4 years. I've been covering for you because I thought you'd eventually grow up. But you never did." Victoria's eyes went wide with shock and betrayal as she stared at her supposed best friend. Then they narrowed dangerously as she looked back and forth between me and Nina, and I could see some terrible realization dawning on her face. "You fucking bitch!" she hissed at Nina with pure venom. "You slept with him, didn't you?" The room erupted in gasps and shocked murmurs as everyone processed Victoria's accusation. I remained completely calm, despite the chaos that was unfolding around us. "Victoria told me," and I quote, I said, making sure my voice carried to every corner of the restaurant. "If it bothers you so much, go get yourself some side action too. Consider it my pre-wedding gift to you." I simply took her up on her generous offer. Her brother Daniel, who's 30 years old, stood up looking like he wanted to physically fight me. But her father quickly put a restraining hand on his shoulder to stop him from making the situation even worse. I continued, making deliberate eye contact with everyone in the room as I spoke. I also discovered that Victoria was planning to use our marriage to access my inheritance from my grandparents. She had planned to get pregnant accidentally within 2 years and intended to continue sleeping with Blake even after we were married in exchange for career advancement. I pulled out copies of the after-marriage list that Nina and I had found and began passing them around the table. People gasped audibly as they read Victoria's detailed plans, written in her own handwriting. "She also created fake evidence to make it look like I was abusive," I added, showing the screenshots from her insurance folder on my phone. "She's been systematically isolating me from my friends, mocking me behind my back, and using me as her stable backup plan while she does whatever and whoever she wants." Victoria was completely losing control now, screaming at the top of her lungs and calling me every vile name she could think of. Her voice was reaching octaves I didn't know were humanly possible. Her mother had buried her head in her hands, clearly mortified by her daughter's behavior. My Aunt Helen looked simultaneously heartbroken for me and relieved that the truth had finally come out. "Marcus, stop it!" Victoria shrieked, her face red and contorted with rage. "You're ruining everything!" "No, Victoria," I replied calmly. "You did that all on your own." I turned to address the stunned dinner guests directly. "I've already called the vendors who would give refunds on deposits. The rest, unfortunately, is money that's been lost. I'm sorry to those of you who traveled here for this wedding. The room blocks at the hotel are still valid if you want to make this a weekend getaway instead." I walked toward the exit with Nina, Derek, and Lisa following close behind me. Behind us, I could hear Victoria's complete meltdown continuing, her voice hitting notes that sounded more like an animal in distress than a human being. Outside the restaurant, her father caught up with me before I could get to my car. I tensed up, expecting anger or accusations, but instead he just looked utterly defeated and exhausted. "I'm sorry, son," he said quietly, his voice heavy with genuine remorse. We didn't raise her to be this person." That broke me more than anything Victoria had done throughout this entire ordeal. The genuine regret and pain in his eyes, the realization that he was seeing his daughter clearly perhaps for the first time in her adult life, hit me harder than all of her cruelty combined. "I know you didn't, Robert," I said, feeling my own voice crack with emotion. "I'm sorry too. It's been 3 months since the rehearsal dinner catastrophe, and the fallout has been both brutal and surprisingly liberating. Victoria's life imploded spectacularly after her public meltdown at the restaurant. She kept insisting to anyone who would listen that I was lying and exaggerating everything, right up until Blake's wife Melissa found out about their affair. It turns out that Melissa's father is the CEO of the company where both Victoria and Blake work. That detail made everything infinitely worse for both of them. Blake was fired immediately once the affair came to light, and his reputation in the industry was completely destroyed. With Blake gone, those promises of a VP position that Victoria had been counting on vanished into thin air. Victoria was demoted after an HR investigation found that she'd been using company resources to plan their hotel meetups and secret rendezvous. Her meteoric rise through the company ranks turned out to be more about who she was sleeping with than her actual professional skills or abilities. But here's where Victoria's situation gets even more satisfying. Remember that wedding fund and all the money she'd been siphoning off to buy expensive gifts for Blake? Well, I'd actually moved most of our savings to a separate account months earlier when I was planning to surprise her with extra honeymoon activities and experiences. She'd been stealing from what she thought was our full joint savings, not realizing she was only taking money from a smaller account I'd left active for regular expenses. I found out later that she'd also maxed out 4 different credit cards in her own name to pay for what she told me were wedding expenses. These wedding expenses turned out to be weekend getaways with Blake, expensive lingerie for their encounters, and even a Rolex watch for him. With her significantly reduced salary after the demotion, she had absolutely no way to make even the minimum payments on this massive debt. When she realized she couldn't afford to keep her luxury apartment without my income, she tried to crawl back to me. The desperate text messages started about 4 weeks after the rehearsal dinner disaster. "Marcus, we need to talk. This has gotten completely out of hand," one message read. "I made a mistake, but you're throwing away 6 years over one slip-up. You know we're good together. Don't let your pride ruin what we have." When I didn't respond to any of her messages, they became increasingly desperate and manipulative. "I'm struggling to make rent. Can we at least discuss the apartment situation? My parents are barely speaking to me. You've turned everyone against me with your lies. Blake was nothing compared to what we had. You were everything to me." The final straw came when she showed up at my new apartment. Derek's girlfriend, Lisa, has a brother who rents out the unit directly below Derek's place for $1,450 a month, which is pretty decent for this area. Victoria was completely hysterical when she arrived unannounced, crying and alternating between begging me to take her back and accusing me of deliberately ruining her entire life. "You turned Nina against me. You turned my parents against me," she screamed. "I made you into somebody. You were nothing when we met, awkward, boring, with no ambition whatsoever. I gave you a personality and taught you how to be interesting." I recorded the entire meltdown on my phone. It wasn't my proudest moment, but it came in incredibly handy later when she tried to tell mutual friends and acquaintances that I'd been abusive and controlling throughout our relationship. Whenever someone approached me with doubts about my version of events, I simply played the recording and let Victoria's own words expose her true character. In one particularly satisfying moment during her unhinged visit, she screamed at me, "You were lucky I stayed with you. Do you know how many guys wanted me? How many offers I had? I chose you out of all of them." I just looked at her calmly and delivered what I knew would be the most devastating truth she could hear. "No, Victoria, you settled for me. Because those other guys just wanted to fuck you. They didn't want to marry you. They saw the real you." That hit her like a physical blow. I could see it in her face. The truth she'd always feared but never wanted to acknowledge. That she was good enough for a fun time but not for forever. Not because of her looks, which were undeniably attractive, but because of what was underneath that pretty exterior. Her financial situation continued spiraling downward when the credit card bills came due. She owed over $31,000 in debt with absolutely no way to pay it off on her drastically reduced salary. The apartment complex sued her for breaking the lease early, adding even more legal and financial complications to her mounting problems. Her car, a leased BMW that she couldn't afford even when we were together and splitting expenses, was repossessed just last week. Her father called me not to beg for reconciliation or to defend Victoria's actions, but simply to apologize again and to let me know that Victoria was moving back home with them. At 27 years old, she was essentially jobless. She finally got fired completely after showing up late and hungover too many times, and completely broken financially and emotionally. Robert sounded utterly exhausted when he spoke to me. He mentioned that they were getting Victoria into therapy and trying to help her rebuild her life from scratch. "She's been this way since high school," he admitted with obvious pain in his voice. "We enabled her behavior, thinking she'd eventually grow out of it and learn to treat people better. I'm sorry that you had to pay the price for our failure as parents. The most vindicating part of this entire experience came through our mutual friends and social circle. Apparently, Victoria had been systematically bad-mouthing me to everyone who would listen, spinning elaborate stories about how I was controlling, jealous, sexually inadequate, and financially irresponsible. She painted herself as the victim of an abusive relationship who had finally found the courage to break free. The problem with her narrative was that people had seen the evidence. They'd witnessed her public meltdown at the rehearsal dinner, read the screenshots of her conversations, and seen the detailed plans she'd made to manipulate our marriage. One by one, mutual friends and acquaintances began publicly correcting her lies and calling out her revisionist history. Her social circle started distancing themselves from her, completely tired of the constant drama and manipulation that seemed to follow her everywhere. Her sister Sophie actually reached out to me personally to apologize for that phone call where she'd told me to man up and deal with Victoria's behavior. "I've spent my whole life living in Victoria's shadow," Sophie confessed during our conversation. "I always believed her version of events because it was easier than standing up to her and dealing with her retaliation. What you did at that dinner, I've never seen anyone just tell the truth about her like that before. It was like watching someone finally say, 'The emperor has no clothes.'" The social media fallout was particularly brutal for Victoria. She had spent years building this perfect Instagram persona: the successful career woman, the devoted fiancé, the fashionable influencer in the making. Her entire online presence was carefully curated to project success, happiness, and desirability. After everything imploded publicly, people started calling out the fakery in her old posts with ruthless precision. They pointed out the staged photos, the borrowed designer clothes that she'd returned to stores the next day, and the fake vacation pictures she'd taken in hotel lobbies where she'd pretend she was staying as a guest. The carefully constructed image she'd spent years building crumbled completely within a matter of weeks. Last I heard, she'd deleted all her social media accounts entirely, unable to deal with the constant scrutiny and criticism. As for Nina and me, we've been taking things incredibly slow. Very, very slow. What happened between us that night wasn't just about revenge or rebound emotions. There was a genuine connection there that we both recognized, but we also understood that it had started under incredibly messed up circumstances. We've been dating properly for about 2 months now, with no rushing and no games. We're just getting to know each other as individuals outside of the Victoria situation. It's strange dating someone who already knows all your emotional baggage and who was present during the worst moment of your life, but it's also freeing in a way that I never expected. There are no pretenses between us, no carefully edited versions of ourselves that we feel pressure to maintain. She's seen me at my absolute lowest point, and I've seen her wrestling with guilt over enabling Victoria's toxic behavior for so many years. That level of honesty and vulnerability has created a foundation that feels completely different from anything I experienced with Victoria. Derek and Lisa have been absolutely incredible throughout this entire ordeal. They've provided emotional support, practical help, and a safe space for me to process everything that happened. My Aunt Helen has already fallen in love with Nina and has basically adopted her into our small family traditions. It feels natural and right in a way that Victoria's relationship with my family never quite did. I've been seeing a therapist to work through the trust issues and psychological damage from Victoria's systematic manipulation and betrayal. It's been helpful to have a professional perspective on how deeply her gaslighting affected my sense of reality and self-worth. One of the most unexpected outcomes of this entire situation has been my relationship with Blake's wife, Melissa. After everything blew up and became public, she reached out to me directly. We met for coffee to compare notes about our respective situations, and we realized just how completely and thoroughly we'd both been deceived by our partners. She's become something of a friend now. We're both members of the same shitty club that nobody wants to join, people whose partners betrayed them in the most intimate and humiliating ways possible. She's currently in the process of divorcing Blake and taking him for everything he's worth, with the full support and resources of her CEO father behind her. I still have moments where I find myself missing the Victoria I thought I knew. 6 years is an incredibly long time to invest in someone, and it's natural to grieve the loss of what I believed we had together. But then I force myself to remember that the woman I thought I loved never actually existed. The real Victoria was manipulating me from day one, seeing me as nothing more than a stable meal ticket while she did whatever and whoever she wanted. Last night, Nina asked me if I regretted how everything went down, if I wished I had just walked away quietly instead of the very public exposure at the rehearsal dinner. No, I told her honestly. Victoria would have spun that narrative too, found a way to make me the villain somehow. At least this way, the truth came out, and people saw her for who she really is. The truth cost Victoria absolutely everything: her job, her reputation, her comfortable lifestyle, and her carefully constructed public image. But it freed me from a life that would have been built entirely on lies and manipulation. Sometimes I think about that after-marriage list she had made, and I get chills realizing how dangerously close I came to being trapped in her web permanently. Sometimes the most painful moments in your life are actually saving you from something infinitely worse that you can't even see coming. I don't know what the future holds with Nina, though things feel genuinely promising between us. I just got a promotion to Senior Network Specialist with a $9,500 salary bump, which feels like validation that my career is moving in the right direction. I don't know what the future holds with anything, really. But for the first time in 6 years, every single decision I make is actually mine. There's no manipulation lurking beneath surface conversations, no walking on eggshells to avoid setting someone off, and no gaslighting that makes me question my own perception of reality. Victoria thought I was nothing without her, that I needed her to give my life meaning and direction. It turns out I'm everything I need to be on my own, and that realization is worth more than any revenge could ever be. To answer some of the most common questions I'm seeing in the comments: yes, I'm still with Nina, and things are going really well between us. We're taking it slow, but I've never felt this kind of genuine connection with anyone before. No, I haven't heard from Victoria directly in about 6 weeks. Her dad still texts me occasionally just to check in, which is weird but kind of nice at the same time. For those saying I should have just walked away quietly, you weren't there for 6 years of systematic manipulation and psychological abuse. The public exposure wasn't just petty revenge. It was the only way to make sure she couldn't spin the narrative and make me the bad guy in everyone else's eyes. To the guy asking if Nina is hot, seriously, that's what you took from this entire story. But yes, she's gorgeous, talented, and kind. She's way out of my league, but somehow she's into me. And yes, the comic collection is safe and sound in my new place. Some things are worth more than money, and those comics represent my connection to my grandfather and my childhood. Victoria threatening them was just another example of how she never understood what actually mattered to me. Thanks again for reading and for all the supportive comments. It feels good to know that people can see the situation clearly and understand why I had to handle it the way I did.